is very cool. You want to talk briefly about some of the amps you're using and some of the pedals you're using now?
Sure, man. Sure, we can do that. The amp I'm using now is a Chicago Blues box. It's like a Fender Bassman configuration. It's like, I know Buddy Guy used them for a while. He might still use them, but it's one of those hand-wired. Personally, I don't like Bassmans. It's funny because on the cover of Texas Sugar, they have a Bassman behind me, you know. And I remember for the longest time, I would do clinics, and people, hey, we got your amp. It's no Fender Bassman. It's like that was Charlie Sexton's amp, and it was just there at the club at the time. You know, they just sort of set it up, and I was using a Fender 75 at that time. I was using two 75s at the time, and I still have them to this day. I'm one of those pack rats. You know, I have just about 95% of all the equipment I've had since Texas Sugar. I don't think I've lost any of it because then I was making money. I didn't have to go to the pawn shop anymore. I was making money. So I've got like all that equipment. I have all the guitars too. So that's the amp I'm using now. And that came about, I believe we were doing either Vantage Point we were doing the first one, Blue Velocity. And somebody had said, a friend of mine said, this company's interested in sponsoring you. So he sent out some amps. And he sent out this Humboldt head, which is like a Marshall 50-watt head. And he sent various other amps, like three or four combos and a couple heads. And I liked the head because I could get a really good distorted sound at a low volume. Whereas on my Marshalls, you know, I had to have it cranked up. But it was a Marshall, you know. Can't go wrong with the Marshall. That's all I say. That's why everybody always tries to compare Marshall, but nobody's ever going to be as good as Marshall, in my opinion. There's some good amps, but Marshall, for some reason, still. Anyway, so he threw that. I bought the head, the Humboldt head, and he threw that amp in as a deal, the Buddy Guy model. And so then I just started making it work, because before that, I used this wall of amps. I used Randall amps, and it was this modular system that they had. You can take these modules out and stick them in, and you got that tone of the amp. And I was using a 50-watt modular head with a black face Fender on one, and then they had a 412 cabinet, and then the other one was a combo of 115, because for some reason I've always liked the 115 combo with the Strat, because it gets these nice low bottom ends for single coil pickups. And I had that, I think I had that going with a twin or a clean or something in that tone. And then I had my Fender Vibra King, and then I had my Marshall, my JCM 900 Marshall.
Now, you were running these on an ABY and switching between them, or
exactly.
running?
But the Marshall, three of those amps, the Randall and the Fender, were all running together, and they were just running series. Whereas the Marshall was on the B channel. So when I'd hit it, then all four of the amps would go, because the Marshall would just to hit a little bit extra oomph, like on some of the Hendrix stuff, some of the crazy stuff. And then, so I played that configuration for a long time. And then I had bought, before that, I had two Fender 75s, and no, I had the Rivera amp. I had the Rivera 115, the Chris Duarte model. And that was a 115 combo, and a Rivera head, I believe a knucklehead is what they called it. And I still have that amp downstairs. And so I had that one, my Marshall, and my Vibra King. And then before that, I used a 75, a Vibra King, and my 72 Redhead. And that amp, I bought that off Dave Grissom. You know, they're in Austin, and he sold it to me. And he loved that amp, but he knew it was going to good hands by selling it to me. And it's 1972 50-watt head, the desirable one. And it just sounds great. I mean, it's a great amp. It's just great. And so then, then I got my JCM 900 after that, but I had those three amps. And then before that, I had 2 Fender 75s. I was using those, and then before that, you can find some old pictures of me playing at Antone's when it used to be in Guadalupe Street back in the early 80s in Austin, and I had a Fender 75, and I put a Tapco graphic equalizer, and I would run through that just to sweeten the sound on the amp. This big old 30-band equalizer that normally went into a rack, and I just had that sitting on my amp. I was crazy. I didn't know what I was doing.
Oh, man.
I'm a knuckleheaded when it comes to that stuff.
The never-ending search for tone, right?
Yeah, but it sounded good to me, you know. But I've never been one of those guys that feels, you know, I meet those guys all the time out there. It's like they're searching for the Holy Grail, and it's literally going to be like that for them. They're never going to find it because it's in their mind somewhere. It's this spiritual place that they feel is empty, and they'll never find it because they feel it has to be something they can literally touch and see, you know, when it's really a spiritual place where you find it, you know. And sometimes I feel sorry for those guys because they'll never find that pedal they'll be looking for when you really should just be working. You should be looking in yourself. That's how I feel it.
At the end of the day, I mean, players like you and a lot of the other people that I've spoken to, I mean, you can pretty much take your guitar and plug into anything, and it's going to sound like you.
Right. It's going to be me. It's still going to be me. Right. And I'll adjust it. And then it's funny because even if it's like a really clean amp, then I know how to adjust my style to get what I need out of it. You know?
You're also working with the guys from Mojo Hand, right?
Yeah, exactly, Zach and stuff, and I really like their pedal. I'm using their Univibe, their Lunavibe is what they call, because I like that for the Hendrix stuff. And then I've been using this pedal. I don't think they make it anymore. The Huckleberry, they've been using that, and that gives me like my real Hendrixy tones, the crazy distortion. I've been using that one, and I think that's the only ones I've got by them.
We never talked. We didn't really talk about Stevie through the interview at all. I met him a year before he died, and I don't know if you met him or not.
I never got to shake his hand, never got to look in his eye.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, man.
Yeah, me too, because, I mean, I'd seen him in the clubs, you know, the few times I saw him in clubs, and to this day, I mean, I can kick myself because he was playing, I was there when he was playing twice a week, you know, in town. Just, you know, you go see him, there'd probably be maybe 10, 15 people there watching him play. But, you know, the times I did see him play, it was unbelievable, you know, and I don't know why I didn't go down. I mean, I was already starting to play and I was out a bunch, but, I mean, when I saw him at that Continental Club, it was still this amazing, amazing thing, you know, and I still get goosebumps when I talk about it.
Yeah, I don't remember what year it was. He was touring opening for Dire Straits. And I had all his vinyl, you know, and I was living down the street from the hotel he was staying at, you know. But at home, sitting on the couch, you know, my mother picks up the phone and calls me from the bar. She's like, "You'll never guess who's sitting behind the piano in the bar." I'm like, "Okay, who?" You know. And I had forgotten that he was in town that night. She's like, "Don't you like that guitar player with the crazy hat and feathers?" I'm like, "You mean Stevie Ray Vaughan?" She's like, yeah, he's sitting at the piano playing right now. Dude, the phone hit the floor. I had socks on. Grabbed my vinyl and ran 4 blocks down the street in my socks. And by the time I got there, he was standing outside with Duffy and the road manager for Dire Straits. And he saw me. He saw me with bated breath, you know, standing there, outreached his hand to me. And I had heard people talk about what kind of grip he had, you know, what kind of hand he had. No bullshit. It was the fiercest handshake I had ever felt. Like, solid. You know how when some people shake your hand, it's very weak and intense. So kind. He said, "Well, I don't know if you had tickets or not for tonight, but, you know, your mom already gave me your name. It's all arranged. You come to the show, your passes and tickets will be there." Unbelievable. You know, I mean, he had already changed my life as a player like you did, you know, listening to that and seeing what he did with the guitar, his dexterity and fluidity and the speed, you know. it was an incredible experience, which is why I had to ask if you had met him.
You know, Stevie, all the stories and all the people I know that knew him, and, you know, I know Tommy and Chris. Stevie was just like this really natural, warm cat.
Yeah.
Some guy, another guy used to be his road manager. He gave me a piece of Stevie's extension cord that he used back in the early days. That was his thing. And he would ask, when he was opening up for a lot of gigs, he goes, I don't even need stage, man. I just need power, man. That's all I need. But yeah, Stevie was the real deal. And Jimmy's actually really nice, man. I know Jimmy. You know, I haven't talked to Jimmy. There was one point, somebody said Roger Neighbor, who owned Grand Emporium in Kansas City. That was a big blues club for a long time. Stevie played there many times. And now Roger Neighbor does the legendary Blues Cruise. He gave up the club in. And I've known Roger Neighbor since the mid-'80s. And Roger Neighbor was telling me, Jimmy Vaughn was saying some kind of hurtful things about you, saying all these kids are just, they're just trying to be Stevie Ray Vaughan wannabe. And he was talking about Kenny, and Roger said he kind of lumped me in with all that crowd. And so I knew another guy that was interviewing Jimmy, and I said, I can't believe Jimmy would say that. Jimmy's great. And so my friend Dave, I'm forgetting all his names, Dave, he interviewed him, and he gave me the cassette tape, and he asked Jimmy point blank, he goes, there was some disparaging things you were saying about the Young Guns, Chris Duarte, and all those guys. He goes, no, to the contrary. I think Chris Duarte is the best one of them all. He goes, he's the one that's the best of them all. I didn't say anything like that about Chris. So it was kind of, I still have that cassette tape somewhere where Jimmy's like saying, no, he's top. He's the best one.
I read your post-NAMM blog, and I appreciated it, and I appreciated the honesty, as well as I also appreciate you not having a problem with getting into the transition between your first record and Texas, and explaining, you know, what you went through there. I appreciate the honesty in that.
You know, I mean, that's what, you know, if anything, you know, getting professional help and going through the program and working the steps, you know, and that's what works for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but that's what's been working for me. And you have to be honest with yourself. And there were so many years that I wasn't honest with myself. And there's still times that I'm not honest with myself, but I try to be honest about where I've been and what I've done. You know, and that's what I'm trying to do. And that's when I do an interview with somebody, I tell them, ask anything you want. Nothing is off limits. I'm not scared of what happened in the past, and I'm not scared to admit it. You know, that was just part of me. Could something have gone better in my career? Probably, you know, but I'll never know. But, you know, I'm here now. I'm making the best of it. You know, I have a great relationship with my daughter. If I've burned bridges in the past, I'm very sorry. But I try to be honest with people. I try to do that.
And that's awesome, man. And I can tell you, coming from this guy, in my fairly large circle, you've touched a lot of people, man. You know?
You know, that's the comment or the compliment that hits me the most, Drew, is just touching people and leaving an impression like that. You know, I don't want to be, there is a certain amount of gratitude that says, oh my God, you're the greatest thing I've ever seen. Yeah, that's kind of fun, you know, but when somebody like what you just said, you've really touched me, those are the ones that I know that means a lot to me. It really does. Mm-hmm. And if something could if I can leave some kind of legacy or mark on music, you know, that'll be the greatest thing I think I'll have ever achieved.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, man.
I've had a really good time, Drew.
Awesome. Listen, thanks very much, man, for taking the time again. It was super cool chatting with you. I still to this day dig what you do, man, and I wish you all the power and keeping on.